Hey guys, tonight we're going all the way back, like way, way back, to the dusty, humming heart of ancient Babylon. You're standing in the middle of a city built from baked mud and meticulous dreams, watching a purple dusk spill across the Euphrates River. There's a thick scent of dates and clay in the air. Someone's burning incense a few rooftops over, and from far off, the low groan of a zebu ox rolling its weight across the fields seeps into the stones. Babylon doesn't sleep early, not really. The nights here are alive with sound. Musicians plucking lyres in courtyards, chatter drifting from shadowy terraces, the rustle of scribes shuffling clay tablets. But the real action is up there, above you, where the stars begin to prick through the darkening velvet. You crane your neck, because everyone here, from temple priest to barley farmer, takes the sky very seriously. You've arrived at the intersection of myth and math, where people look up not to dream, but to calculate. Because in Babylon, time isn't just a sequence of ticking moments. It's a sacred contract with the heavens. They don't wear watches, of course. They're the watches. Or at least they think so. And, well, you probably wouldn't survive this. Between the 45-degree heat, the rigid temple hierarchies, and the daily anxiety of forgetting which god is in charge of which planet, your modern calendar app won't help you now. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, post your location and your local time in the comments. Always fun seeing who's falling asleep where. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The street beneath your feet is still warm from the day. The clay walls around you hold the heat like old bread. You duck past a pair of goats and a merchant's son dragging a basket of fish, and make your way toward the towering temple of Marduk. That ziggurat, layered like a seven-tier cake, scrapes the sky. On top of it, watchmen, astronomer priests, and a few very bored assistants, all waiting for the first blinking star to appear. Time here doesn't start so much as it emerges. The Babylonians don't have wristwatches, but they do have the Enuma Anu Enlil, a giant celestial cheat sheet carved on hundreds of clay tablets. It tells them which stars rise when, what that means for the crops, and how to time your goat's wedding. Okay? Maybe not that last one. You arrive at the base of the ziggurat, just as an assistant scurries past you with a basket full of reed pens and oil. You follow him, slowly, up the crumbling staircase. Each level gets breezier. The higher you go, the city falling away behind you in a haze of smoke, oil lamps, and tired shouting. At the top, the head priest nods at you. His robe smells like frankincense and responsibility. He gestures toward the horizon. There, he mutters, "Venu." You squint. Just a faint glimmer. But it's enough. A scribe begins etching the exact timing into a wet clay tablet, marking the planet's rise and noting down the hour. Except wait. What hour? There's no clock tower tolling behind you. No church bells. No synced phone notifications. Time here is a mix of position, pattern, and divine vibes. The Babylonians track the rising and setting of celestial bodies not just for fun or festivals, but because they need to know when things will happen, when to irrigate, when to plant, when a king should go to war or stay home and pray instead. The stars aren't just shiny, they're strategic. Here's the neat trick. They divide the sky into predictable arcs. Think of it as a cosmic spreadsheet with rows of gods and columns of night hours. Babylon's calendar runs on a lunisolar system, meaning it uses both the sun and moon to map out the year. Pretty clever, but it leads to a slight headache. How do you measure hours when the sun isn't consistent? Historians still argue whether these early hours were based purely on the sun's journey or had some agreed-upon increments measured through observation. It's a little fuzzy. We don't have a Babylonian icon to check. But what we do know is that Babylon didn't treat every part of the empire the same. If you lived closer to the mountains, the sun dipped behind peaks early. Your evening started sooner. If you were out in the flat marshes, daylight lingered. So in a weird way, Babylon already had local time. Not coordinated, not unified, but very real. They didn't have time zones, but they had time zones. You just couldn't see them on a map. The priest sighs. The stars are all in place. He hands you a damp clay tablet. Midnight will come, he says, when the dog star is overhead. You nod, not entirely sure what that means, but it sounds official. Meanwhile, back in the city, oil lamps are being snuffed. Temple cooks are packing up. Someone, somewhere, drops a jug and curses softly. A baby goat bleats like it's singing the end credits. And above it all, the stars roll onward. Quiet and mathematical and oddly soothing. They don't rush. They don't panic. They just shine, on their own schedule. You linger a little longer on the ziggurat's summit, the wind tugging gently at your tunic. Below you, Babylon stretches out in dusky layers. Mud-brick rooftops, candlelit courtyards, and alleyways still echoing with late-night trade. But up here, your attention is fixed skyward. You're not the only one. Babylonian priests, known as Baru, have been watching the heavens for centuries. Not for leisure, for policy, for prophecy, for predicting when someone's mother-in-law might drop by uninvited. The heavens hold the answers to everything, if you know how to read them. You edge closer to a low stone platform where two priests are muttering over a bundle of star charts etched into clay. One of them gestures to a flickering point of light near the horizon. Ninurta rises early this season, he mumbles, naming a warrior god tied to Saturn. His colleague grunts. Good for barley. He says, bad for marriages. This isn't just stargazing. It's scheduling. The Babylonians were among the first to systematically record celestial movements. Not for romance, but for logistics. You probably use a calendar app to track birthdays and dental cleanings. They use stars to decide when to irrigate canals, when to dig trenches, or when a royal decree should be read aloud in the public square. That wasn't superstition, it was statecraft. You stroll over to a tall priest with a smudge of ink on his wrist. He's holding a clay tablet that looks like a lunar Sudoku puzzle. You squint at it. Jupiter, he says softly. Nibiru. He crosses the sky every 12 years. If he's early, taxes will be late. Probably. Babylonians named planets after gods, but they also track them like accountants. Jupiter's 12-year orbit helped structure longer cycles in their calendar. They tracked eclipses, solstices, moon phases, even the odd meteor shower, though they probably called it the night the sky sneezed fire. Historians still argue whether Babylonian astronomy was truly scientific or merely ritual. But one thing's clear, it was precise. And from that precision came something more profound, an early sense of temporal structure, a kind of cosmic scaffolding for daily life. And all of it happened without telescopes, without quartz, without an ounce of caffeine. You lean against a sun-warmed wall as another assistant walks past carrying a bundle of reed pens. The ink-stained priest stops him. Go check if the star of Ishtar is aligned with the Pleiades, he mutters. The boy groans, nods, and trudges off, muttering about how every constellation looks like a badly cooked fish. You smirk. Even ancient interns hated their night shifts. But here's the brilliant thing. Babylon didn't just observe the stars. They cataloged them obsessively. What are their greatest hits? The Mull, Appin tablets. A kind of celestial encyclopedia. They listed stars, constellations, and instructions for timekeeping that spanned the sky like a cosmic subway map. Want to know when Orion rises in the month of Nisanu? It's on the tablet. Wondering when Venus disappears? Check the clay. You crouch beside a young scribe who's copying data from one tablet to another. His hands are stained with ink, his eyes with exhaustion. We note the heliacal rising of Sirius. He whispers, almost to himself, to mark the month of doing. Then he pauses. Or, was it Abu? He blinks. Historians still argue about that. Same kid. The deeper you go into Babylonian astronomy, the more you realize it wasn't just about when. It was about where. The rising of a particular star didn't just mark a moment. It marked a place in the sky, a point on an invisible celestial map that wrapped itself around the city like a divine quilt. And that map told you what time it was, not by minutes or seconds, but by the attitude of the universe. Back down the staircase. A temple bell rings softly, a flat, low clang made with a bronze disc the size of a dinner plate. Not everyone could hear it across the city, of course. But if you were close enough, it meant something had just shifted. A new watch of the night. Another hour fallen into the past. In Babylon, the night was divided into watches, not strict hours, but rough slices of dark, usually 3 per night. Temple guards rotated on this schedule, so did some rituals. If your goat went into labor during the second watch, you'd better hope she waited until the third. You pass a cluster of young students practicing their star names under a torch. One mispronounces Kaksid, and another slaps him lightly with a reed. "That's not Jupiter," she whispers. "That's a stew ingredient." You leave him to it and climb back down the final tier of the ziggurat. The wind is lighter here, the stars still swirling quietly above. Somewhere to the east, beyond the river, a low thunder rolls. Maybe a storm is coming, or maybe the gods are just shuffling furniture. At ground level, Babylon feels slower. The priests above are busy charting a world in motion, but down here, people are winding down. A merchant locks up his stall. A woman yawns into her scarf. A child asks if the stars can hear secrets. You smile, because up there, high above, Babylon is counting, not with clocks or timers, but with stars, with breath, with stories carved into clay. And somehow, they've already figured out what we'd take thousands more years to realize. That time isn't always the same everywhere. That even in a city bound by ritual and gods and mud brick tradition, time still shifts, gently, quietly, star to star. And that's where you're drifting now. The stars are fading now, not because it's morning, far from it, but because you're walking deeper into the alleys where walls press in and oil lamps cast more glow than the sky. Babylon, for all its grandeur, has its quieter corners, places where astronomers give way to accountants and temples to taverns. You're heading toward one of the earliest bureaucratic wonders of the world, the palace archives. Because what the heavens didn't tell the Babylonians, their paperwork often did. You step through a stone threshold and into a long, cool corridor lit by flickering lamps and lined with shelves. Except they're not shelves as you'd picture them. They're recessed alcoves, each stacked high with neatly baked clay tablets, some no bigger than a phone, others as large as a cutting board, and each one inscribed with wedge-shaped cuneiform so tight and precise it might as well be spreadsheet poetry. A clerk nods as you pass. He's too tired to question your presence. You seem competent. You seem dusty. That's good enough. You find a tablet labeled with a date, year 17 of King Nabonassar. That puts us around 730 BCE. This little slab records sunrise and sunset over 365 days. Not because someone was sentimental, but because Babylon was tracking the drift. You run a finger along the baked edge. The entries are brief. Sun rises before cockcrow. Shadow of the obelisk falls short at midday. This was time, not as an idea, but as a physical object, a thing you could measure with shadows, track with ink, and store in a cubbyhole. The Babylonians didn't have mechanical clocks, but they came close with something just as charming: water clocks. You find one in the corner of the archive, half forgotten, resting beside a basket of broken styluses. It's a wide-brimmed bowl with a small hole in the bottom. Water would be poured in, and as it dripped out, scribes would measure how long it took to empty. Different sizes for different seasons, since the pace of night and day shifts with the sky. Historians still argue how accurate these water clocks really were. Some say they could track time within a few minutes. Others claim the margin of error was bigger than a camel's ego. You sit on a cool bench and close your eyes for a moment, letting the dripping sound echo in your mind. Slow, predictable, soothing. You can imagine it in the palace. A servant watching the bowl, eyes heavy, waiting for the moment when it's his turn to nudge the next official awake. These clocks were used for everything from religious ceremonies to court appointments. You didn't want to show up late to a royal audience, especially if you were a low-ranking scribe hoping for a promotion and not a reassignment to latrine oversight in Outer Akkad. You trail your fingers along a wall where a large mural depicts the god Shamash, the sun god, holding a rod and a ring. Scholars believe this image symbolized divine justice and, wait for it, measurement. Even their gods were clocked in, because in Babylon, the sun wasn't just warmth and light. It was a cosmic yardstick. Obelisks and shadow sticks were placed strategically around the city. You'd track where the shadow fell on a marked line, almost like an ancient sundial, minus the polite chimes. One clay tablet records an entire day by shadow measurements. It even notes a hiccup, clouds prevented observation. Diviner sneezed. Omen unclear. Babylon had its off days. Still, the larger pattern held, and that pattern became something more: zonation. You pass a gathering of officials hunched over a set of new tablets. One is pointing at a map etched in faint lines, showing distant cities: Susa, Mari, Uruk. Each lies in a slightly different direction, with its own pattern of sunrises and star movements. You realize what they're doing: comparing data, trying to coordinate festivals across distances. You lean in. Sun rises 1 hour later in Uruk during month Ulilu, someone mutters. Another replies. Then we adjust messenger departure. Add one rest stop. It's crude. It's inconsistent. But it's the beginning of time differentiation by geography. Not a modern time zone, of course, but an awareness that different places experience time differently, that your midday might not be someone else's. That one ritual can't happen at the same moment in two cities without divine confusion and probably a goat uprising. You head out of the archives as a group of scribes shuffle in, yawning, holding bundles of damp cloths for clay. One of them is wearing a tunic marked with the royal seal. That means he's tracking the king's dream schedule. Yes. Babylon even monitored when their monarchs napped, possibly for signs from the gods, or just to optimize the royal mood for diplomatic meetings. You stroll past a courtyard where reeds grow in shallow pools and dragonflies blink slowly in the torchlight. A young boy sits cross-legged, drawing in the mud with a stick. You peek at his diagram. It's a rough star map. He's gotten the Pleiades backward and accidentally given Saturn a smiley face, but he's on his way. This is how the system spreads. Through observation, repetition, and very sleepy apprentices. The palace bell tolls once. You pause, listening. It's not a time signal, exactly, but it marks something. A change, a rotation. Maybe the priest upstairs has begun his nightly prayer. Maybe the clerk has just switched out a full water clock. You feel it. Time shifting. The city humming along, quiet but purposeful. Tethered to systems both celestial and hand-built. A city that does not measure hours as we do, but tracks them, feels them, lets them flow like the Euphrates itself. And as you lean against the outer wall of the palace, watching the shadows sway, you can't help but wonder what the Babylonians would make of our modern world. A place where we fight over daylight saving, where we tap watches that talk back, where time zones stretch across screens and drop-down menus. They might laugh, or they might nod and say, "Ah yes," still using shadow tricks. You wake. Well, not wake exactly, just blink slower, and the scent of baked date cakes floats in from a street vendor outside the palace wall. It's nearly dawn now, though you wouldn't know it from the quiet. Babylon starts slow, like molasses in winter. Time, after all, is a luxury of those who can afford to notice it. And you, lucky you, are heading toward the ziggurat, not for exercise, though the climb might make your calves weep. No, you're here to meet the priest astronomers, experts in both sky and schedule, who've turned the heavens into a kind of ticking calendar, and perhaps the earliest timekeeping bureaucracy known to humanity. Your sandals thump against stone as you rise level by level, each tier smaller than the last, until you reach a shaded platform strewn with star charts and, more water clocks. You see one elder adjusting the angle of a shadow stick. Another is marking the horizon with a plumb bob and line of twine. You breathe in the high air, heavy with frankincense and just a hint of pigeon. Below, the city stretches in every direction, a patchwork of rooftops and sleepy courtyards. Beyond that, Fields and irrigation canals gleam like silver threads. Now, imagine you are this priest, trusted, respected, likely sleep-deprived, and your job is to keep the empire on schedule. But unlike your counterparts in distant regions, you don't have a bell tower or a quartz watch. You've got sky, in a city that expects omens and harvest dates delivered with precision. The Babylonians didn't think of time as a rigid sequence. They saw it as cycles. The moon's cycle, the solar year, the appearance and disappearance of Venus. And in their most poetic, bureaucratic flourish, they even had something called the Saros cycle, a period of about 18 years used to predict eclipses. 18 years. Think about that. You'd spend your whole youth waiting to confirm that your last eclipse prediction was correct. If it wasn't, well, no one would fire you, but they might blame a flood on your sloppy calculations. No pressure. One of the scholars beside you shows you a tablet. It's part of the famed Enuma Anu Enlil, a compendium of celestial omens. This isn't a bedtime story. It's the official log of how the gods communicate through stars. If Venus appears too close to Jupiter, prepare for rebellion. If Mars turns retrograde in Aries, bring in the goats. Lots of goats. Historians still debate whether these omens were used more for actual scheduling or justifying decisions after the fact. But there's no denying this much. Babylon's timing rituals were highly formalized, and they depended on celestial accuracy. And here's where it gets really clever. Remember those outposts? The cities stretching far beyond Babylon's heart? They weren't left in the dark. No, Babylon dispatched messengers carrying astronomical data, star calendars carved into tiny clay tags. These were the primitive predecessors of synced calendars. You imagine a dusty courier trotting across the desert with a scroll under one arm and a bladder of wine in the other. He arrives in Sippar and announces, "Festival of Ishtar delayed 2 days. Moon has been sluggish." Then he downs the wine and immediately regrets it because it's 108 degrees in the shade. But here's the real twist. These coordinated updates began to function like a zone system. Sippar would receive word that a ritual observed in Babylon at dusk should begin when their dusk arrived, even if that was 40 minutes later. It was a primitive, elegant compromise. Not simultaneous, but harmonious. They didn't call it a time zone, of course. The word didn't exist. But they had a system where events were understood to occur in local time, aligned to central planning. That's more than many empires could say 2,000 years later. And yet, the imperfections were still there. One record described the festival starting too early in a city to the east. The moon rose late, the incense was damp, and a goat fainted halfway through the sacrificial dance. The scribe politely blames miscommunication in the reckoning of hours, which is ancient Babylonian for someone forgot to carry the one. As you rest on the ziggurat's sun-warmed ledge, watching a pigeon repeatedly fail to land on a slanted roof, you start to see how beautiful this chaos was. This attempt to tame time without clocks, to align temples without satellite feeds, to believe that if you watched the heavens long enough, you could make the world itself run on schedule. Even their language of time was charmingly fluid. There were no 10:30 a.m.s or 12:15. Instead, you had cockcrow, sunstride, shadow length of a spear, and my personal favorite, when the heat moves to the lower teeth, which could mean early afternoon or particularly spicy lunch. You descend from the ziggurat slowly, one step at a time. The sun has cleared the rooftops now, and the streets are humming. Bakers slap dough. Goats bleed opinions. A merchant shouts something about a discount on cedar oil if you buy before the sixth shadow. And that's the thing. People use these vague markers, not out of laziness, but because they worked. Because if you said, "Meet me at the second shadow length past midday," your friend knew exactly when to show up, unless it was cloudy, in which case, blame the gods and go take a nap. A boy runs past you with a tablet tied to his waist. He's a temple assistant, probably delivering the day's updated calendar. You can just make out the characters scratched into the surface, sunrise marked late. Adjust bells accordingly. And somewhere, in a chamber full of chimes and ropes, A priest will tug a different chord at a different time. Just a little adjustment. Just a ripple in the day. The city doesn't notice. But you do. Because here, in this moment, you realize the Babylonians didn't just invent timekeeping tools. They invented the conversation around time. The dialogue between sky and soil, between central city and distant outpost. They didn't conquer time. They negotiated with it. And usually they won. You head toward the harbor now, skirting canals where reeds sway and fishermen nap in their boats, oars dangling lazily in the water like forgotten thoughts. The heat rises gently off the mud brick, and your feet know the rhythm of this city better than any clock. Down here by the Euphrates, Babylon hums with movement, a different sort of timekeeping altogether. Boats glide in and out of narrow docks. Porters shout, chickens scatter, and someone's grandmother yells at a merchant for selling yesterday's barley as today's. It's chaos, yes, but it's all ticking, just not to hours and minutes. It ticks to tides, to sun, to daily habits carved in a bone. Here, time doesn't march, it puddles. And yet, even this watery part of the city has its own schedule, one that stretches far beyond its banks. Because Babylon wasn't just a religious capital. It was a trade capital, which means, brace yourself, it had deadlines. Babylon's port authorities had to time the grain shipments from up the Tigris, the cedar barges from Tyre, the tin caravans from the Zagros. Each shipment arrived with its own expectations, its own internal calendar. Miss a boat by a day, and your entire festival might lack incense. Or worse, wine. So what do? They created a shipping registry system tied to sky-based timing. You pass a scribal station, where officials lounge under a canopy sipping fermented date beer, scratching records into clay. Each entry includes not just the goods and the merchant's name, but something like arrived at second moonrise following last Venus ascent, which in modern terms is a Tuesday. A scholarly debate still lingers over whether these were poetic timestamps or formalized timing mechanisms. Was it just a flowery way to log events? Or were merchants genuinely expected to sync with Venus's schedule? It's the sort of thing that keeps Assyriologists up at night. One tablet, now sitting in a museum in Istanbul, records a ship arriving late by 4 fingers of shadow. The scribe noted the delay with mild scorn, but no fine, which suggests flexibility, or possibly bribery. Either way, it's comforting. And what's truly astonishing is that Babylon didn't just record this data, it shared it. Clay letters, sealed and stamped, were sent from port to palace. Updates on shipments, temple inventory, arrival projections. The entire supply chain was essentially a slow, sun-dried newsletter. Now, imagine the logistical ballet this required. A temple festival needs rose water. The rose water is on a barge. The barge left Mari 2 weeks ago. The priests in Babylon calculate that the moon has been full twice since then, and therefore the ship should arrive tomorrow, assuming no crocodile-related delays. And if it doesn't, well, the rose water gets replaced by myrrh, and the ceremony continues. Flexible expectations, ancient edition. But this port isn't just about goods. It's about information. Travelers arrive from all over the known world. Elam, Egypt, Anatolia, even the distant Indus. And each brings not just spices, but stories. News of eclipses, rumors of floods, notes about new building projects, and yes, ideas about how to tell time. A trader from the Indus might talk about water clocks made from tiny bowls with pinholes. A man from Egypt brags that his hometown has a giant stone gnomon that casts a shadow as tall as a camel. The Babylonians listen, nod, and take notes, especially if it might help make their next lunar chart a little more precise. That's the secret to Babylonian timekeeping. Not perfection, adaptation. Even the famed hours weren't fixed. A Babylonian hour was a 12th of daylight, meaning it changed with the seasons. Summer hours were long and slow, winter ones brisk and stingy. Nighttime had its own hours, based on star risings and watchman shifts. Time was relative before Einstein ever scribbled note. You pause by the edge of the dock, where a sailor scratches his back with an oar and a boy tries to sell you fish that's, let's call it, optimistically fresh. The river burbles, indifferent, somewhere upriver. A barge loaded with barley ticks toward the city, guided not by GPS, but by the position of Orion's shoulder. And yet, somehow, it works. Historians are still unsure just how synchronized these shipping schedules really were. Some argue they were more ritual than reliable. Others believe the precision was surprisingly high, given the tools. But nearly all agree Babylon's mastery of predictive scheduling was centuries ahead of its time. And the real genius? They built buffer zones into everything. That's right. Ancient Babylon invented something like your modern flex hours. Ceremonies didn't start at exactly sun's crest. They started during a ritually appropriate window. If a delivery was late, the scribe would adjust the date in the temple records to match the arrival. Problem solved. Everyone goes home with pomegranates. It's the kind of soft-edged logic that makes you wonder how we ever evolved into being late for Zoom calls. As you leave the docks, two elderly women are arguing about whether a festival is today or tomorrow. One says the stars were aligned. The other says she counted wrong. They laugh, shrug, and decide to eat the special bread both days, just in case. Babylonian problem-solving at its finest. You walk back toward the heart of the city as the sun climbs. And you start to sense it again, that quiet coordination. The feeling that everyone is loosely tuned to the same rhythm, even if their clocks are made of shadow and guesswork. A porter hauls a basket of fish and mutters something about missing the midday bell. There is no bell, of course, just a temple gong, rung when a priest squints at a shadow and decides, yep, that'll do. And in a way, isn't that more honest? A little leeway, a little mystery. A reminder that time doesn't have to feel like a countdown. It can feel like a conversation. You pass under a narrow archway, stone cool against your shoulders. Somewhere behind you, a temple gong rings, not sharply, but like a gentle cough of bronze. Lunchtime. You follow the sound of that half-hearted gong through the crooked alleys of inner Babylon, dodging goats, children, and a man carrying a vat of something suspiciously sour-smelling. It's technically the 6th hour, midday, more or less, but nobody's checking their wrist. Instead, the city is shifting gears. Shops slide their shutters half-closed. Street food vendors fan their grills, and scribes duck into shaded courtyards to sip something that tastes like fermented licorice and regret. And right here, right now, is where Babylon's timekeeping starts to get mathematical. Because while the rest of the city naps or negotiates lunch prices, a different kind of brain is busy at work, one that doesn't care how hot it is or how late the barley barge is running. You're standing on the threshold of the Eker, the ziggurat temple of Marduk. And up there, way up there, time is being calculated like it's sacred geometry. You begin the climb, all 91 steps of it, each one worn smooth by centuries of sandals. Halfway up, your thighs begin questioning your life choices. By the top, you're certain this is either religious devotion or cardio punishment. But the view is a God's eye calendar. From up here, the city flattens into tidy sections, homes, markets, canals, gardens. The Euphrates slices through like a lazy vein. And beyond that, fields, hills, and the enormous, never-ending sky. This is where the priest astronomers did their finest work. They tracked not just sunrises, but the exact points on the horizon where the sun rose and set throughout the year. They noted when stars like Sirius or Aldebaran first appeared at dawn, known as heliacal risings. These weren't just poetic milestones. They were appointments, markers, alarms, if you will, except instead of buzzing in your pocket, they shimmered gently into the morning haze. And from those celestial observations, they began to carve time into zones. Not like our modern time zones, those rigid slices of longitude, but functional zones, regions where agricultural and religious timing needed to be adjusted according to the local sky. Here's how it worked. If a temple in Sippar noticed Venus rising 3 days later than it did in Babylon, they'd adjust their festival date accordingly. The god was punctual. The stars were not. So humans adapted. Historians still debate whether this constituted true regional time zones or simply a flexible liturgical calendar. But one clay tablet, smudged but legible, lists feast days across 5 cities, each slightly staggered, depending on their observations, which suggests maybe both. And here's the brilliant part. These weren't just theoretical musings locked away in temples. They were shared. Priests wrote letters to each other, not just to gossip about whose ox got loose during sacrifice. Yes, that happened. But to compare sunrise angles and eclipse omens. It's like a group chat, except in cuneiform, and every message took a week to arrive and smelled faintly of goat. By now, you've wandered into one of the temple libraries. It's dark, cool, and smells like baked mud and old incense. Shelves of tablets line the walls, stacked like the world's most uncooperative Jenga set. A priest leans over a scribe, muttering something about Mercury's retrograde causing migraines in priests born under Jupiter. You smile. Astrology and astronomy weren't separate yet. Here, they're the same divine language. You pick up a tablet carefully and squint at the neat wedge marks. It's a star chart, and next to it, a chart converting star positions into agricultural advice. If the moon rises in Taurus, plant chickpeas. Is it science? Is it myth? Is it dietary planning from the gods themselves? Yes. There's even a tablet listing the length of daytime throughout the year, broken into 12 equal hours, each changing in length depending on the season. Summer hours stretched long like a cat in the sun. Winter hours huddled short like a teenager avoiding chores. And here's the twist. Those variable hours meant Babylon needed different sundials for different months. Some even had adjustable gnomons, little knobs, or levers to shift the shadow angle. That's right. Babylonian time wasn't just measured. It was customizable. Historians drool over one artifact found near Ur, a curved bronze disc with markings along the edges. Some say it's a sundial. Others argue it's part of a ceremonial tray for sacred cake. The debate is ongoing, heated, and includes at least one academic who insists it's definitely for cake and nothing else. You decide to believe both. Back outside, you peer over the city's edge again. The sun has shifted, just enough for the scribes to ring the next gong. Not precisely noon, but close enough for the temple staff to trade in scrolls for snacks. You make your way down, carefully. Each step echoes with questions. How did a civilization so old manage such accurate timekeeping? How did they convince people to follow it? And what happened when it went wrong? The truth is it rarely did. Babylonian time wasn't enforced with alarms. It was invited with omens. It wasn't about control. It was about harmony. The gods moved in rhythms, so the people did too. And if the stars blinked out of line for a night, well, that's what backup astrologers were for. You pause at the base of a ziggurat, watching as a pair of young apprentices use a stick and a flat stone to check the afternoon shadow. One nods, the other shrugs. They'll average it. And that, right there, is Babylonian time in a nutshell. Fluid, yet firm. Mathematical, yet magical. And always, always, written in clay. You descend from the ziggurat as dusk settles once more, and the city's rhythms shift into their nocturnal patterns. Shadows lengthen, the air cools, and oil lamps, tiny golden moons, begin to wink on down every alley. You pause by a battered bronze lamppost where a pair of priests are debating something in low voices. You edge closer, curious. They're in the thick of the ghost hour debate. Moonrise should mark the start of the first night watch. One insists, jabbing a finger at the horizon. His companion counters with a soft laugh. But then what are the cowherds? They never see the moon until after they herd at least 2 flocks. Moonrise. It's deceptively simple. Yet in Babylon, even that celestial event carries layers of complication. Because the moon doesn't appear like clockwork. Clouds interfere, dust storms obscure, and sometimes it simply hides, sulking behind the sun's glare. So when exactly does the night begin? This debate isn't a fringe amusement. It shapes temple schedules, guard rotations, and even tavern opening hours. After all, If you promise a mug of barley wine at the first watch, patrons will expect it, unless the moon hides, in which case they'll complain about divine favoritism. Historians still argue whether Babylonian night was officially divided by moonrise, star shines, or something more poetic, like when the echo of a temple gong reaches the city walls. There's no conclusive handbook, only a patchwork of temple scrolls, each with its local precedent. You join the argument, offering your most neutral observation. Technically, lunar visibility was charted in the mole. Appin tablets, you say. Both priests nod, though one whispers that those tablets are as clear as mud on a rainy day. Still, they refer to entries noting that the moon's crescent must reach at least 2 degrees above the horizon to count as risen. Otherwise, you're stuck in a ghost hour, an ambiguous period neither day nor night. The ghost hour, what a perfect name. It hovers like a silent interval, where nothing is official. Yet everything might happen. Pilgrims use it to slip into temples unnoticed. Drunkards delay curfews by claiming the moon is still playing hide-and-seek. Children sigh. We can't begin the bedtime story until it's truly dark. You lean against the lamppost, listening to the priest's low murmurs. One muses, should the first watch be from true moonrise to first star, or from the temple bell to the second drumbeat? The other sighs. Historians still debate whether they ever agreed on a standard. Classic. To understand their quandary, imagine you're living without our rigid clocks, yet refusing to use sunrise or sunset because they're too blunt. So you reach for something that winks on and off, something capricious, the moon. It's perfect for romance, lousy for schedules. Later, you drift into a temple courtyard where a small group of apprentices rehearse the nightly rituals. A teenage girl, her hair tucked under a linen cap, squints at her tablet by torchlight. She's copying a passage about the ghost hour, meticulously noting that the ideal time to sacrifice goats to the moon god Sin was when the left horn dips below the horizon, but before the city's torches outnumber the stars. It's delightfully specific and yet maddeningly flexible. The apprentices giggle over the phrasing, imagining the poor goat trapped halfway between two worlds. You remind them of the ancient saying, a goat unoffered during the ghost hour may wander into your dreams. A light joke, yes, but also a callback because remember that goat in section 1, squealing like a tenor? One apprentice frowns. That's just superstition. The other shrugs. Historians still argue whether it was superstition or ceremony. And here's the quirky bit. Some scrolls describe a third moonrise, not the initial crescent nor the half moon, but when the waxing gibbous achieves a particular luminous quality, like a lantern glowing through reed matting. Folks would mark their potter's schedules, tavern hours, even tax collections by this third rise, because it was visible enough and late enough that the ghost hour had truly passed. From your vantage by a low fountain, you watch water ripple in torchlight, echoing the debate above. You dip a finger and feel the cool. It's soothing, a reminder that Babylon's complexities are human at heart, built by people who wanted precision but valued flexibility. As the moon crests the horizon, though faint and smeared by desert dust, you hear a distant bell. Not the temple's proud gong, but a smaller tinkle from a guard tower. It's their compromise, marking the hour not by sky alone, but by action. A bell, a bellboy, a bartender pouring the first cup. You can practically hear the city exhale. The ghost hour recedes. Night officially begins. The apprentices close their tablets. The late-night baker shouts, "Pita fresh, catch before dawn." And somewhere, a drunk philosopher declares, time is a circle made of sand. You grin. The Babylonians might not have had synchronized minute hands, but they had character. They debated moonrise like we debate daylight saving. They carved meaning out of in-betweens. They built a schedule that bent around life's little uncertainties. And here you are, standing in that ambiguity, feeling the soft hush of a city that has learned to live within the glow and the gap. It's a messy harmony, a midnight symphony conducted by stars, bells, and the occasional bleeding goat. In a few hours, you'll climb back up to record the Pleiades' ascent. Meanwhile, you savor the magic of this ghost hour, because it reminds you of one simple truth. Time isn't just numbers. It's life's gentle pauses, in the shadow between clocks, in the breath between moments, and in the hush of a moon that won't always show its face. The city has settled into its nighttime rhythm now, its pulse slowed but steady, like the soft breathing of someone dozing beside a window. You walk through narrow streets, past shuttered stalls and snoring cats, guided now not by time, but by scent, roasted lentils, honeyed dates, and something suspiciously burnt that someone probably tried to pass off as flatbread. You're headed toward the Riverside Warehouse District, where Babylonian merchants used the Tigris not just for transport, but as their unofficial calendar. That's right. Long before shipping containers and customs declarations, traders here operated on a surprisingly consistent lunar-based shipping schedule, or at least they tried to. Picture it. Flat-bottomed boats bobbing at the quay, loaded with jars of sesame oil, lapis lazuli, and absurdly heavy baskets of onions. Their departure time? Whenever the tide seemed auspicious. That might mean anything from after the fish stopped biting to just before the third moonrise we mentioned earlier. Historians still argue whether Babylonian traders followed a formalized time slot system or whether the schedule was more like a polite suggestion. Sail when the sky feels right. Either way, you're here now, watching a slightly exasperated dock clerk scribbling symbols on a wax tablet. He mutters, "I told them. If they miss the waxing gibbous, they miss the tariff window." Tariffs. Ah yes, the eternal dance between trade and time. Babylon taxed certain goods only during specific lunar phases, supposedly to appease deities who preferred their onions fresh and their incense timely. You'd think this would create chaos, but it weirdly worked. Everyone had skin in the timing game. You step aside to let young boy dash past, holding a reed scroll in one hand and a fish in the other. He's shouting something about a tithe recalculation, and honestly, that fish probably has a better understanding of ancient logistics than you do. Back in a warehouse, someone's lighting a portable oil lamp. The walls flicker, revealing mural fragments, scenes of trade caravans, celestial maps, and, in one particularly smug-looking carving, a scribe pointing to the stars with one hand and a balance scale in the other. It's Babylon's not-so-subtle way of saying, astronomy is economics. You crouch beside a merchant laying out his inventory. He sighs, the northern traders always arrive off schedule. They blame the hills, but we all know it's their lazy moon readers. His daughter chimes in. Historians still argue whether the Uruk calendar was better, but at least they didn't show up during sandstorms. The mood turns cheerful as a group gathers for the tally game, a lighthearted ritual where merchants guess arrival times based on moon charts, wind direction, and, strangely, the mood of the neighborhood cats. One merchant claims cats sleep curled up before good sailing nights. Another swears by the thickness of lentil stew as a prophetic indicator. You laugh with them, but there's real data hidden in the jokes. These people crafted practical time systems out of unpredictable inputs, tides, phases, shadows, and turned them into networks of shared expectations. It's fuzzy math, but it held their world together. You walk further upriver, where a small pier is lined with reed rafts awaiting departure. A father and son team are loading baskets of dry dates. The boy asks, "How do we know when to leave?" And the father replies, "When the moon stops arguing with the river." It's poetic, yes, but also grounded. The Tigris has moods. Under certain lunar tides, its currents are calmer, making upstream travel more feasible. The Babylonians didn't need tide tables. They used observation, oral tradition, and just enough superstition to make each guess feel like wisdom. Along the riverbank, a small shrine to Nan-Shi, the goddess of justice and prophecy, sits beneath a fig tree. It's said that traders left tiny tokens there before long journeys. You spot a cracked amulet, a sprig of myrrh, and an oddly fresh lump of cheese. No doubt someone hoping for safe passage and timely tariffs. Above you, stars begin to pierce through the haze. You glance at the water and see them mirrored, trembling. Somewhere nearby, A musician begins to play a reed flute, the notes curling like incense through the air. You lie back on a storage sack and watch the stars shift. It hits you. Babylon didn't just invent time zones, they lived them. Their time was plural, layered, and location-based. A lunar hour in the temple district wasn't the same as a lunar hour in the markets. And no one seemed bothered. In fact, they preferred it that way. You think back to that temple bell and how its echo didn't reach the river until nearly a minute later. That delay? It was built into the schedule. Traders didn't complain about it. They adapted, flowed with it, like the river itself. Historians still argue whether this level of fluidity was sustainable or whether it led to bureaucratic meltdown. But you suspect Babylon's genius wasn't about control. It was about containment, about creating a system that absorbed error, welcomed delay, and still delivered onions on time. You yawn. The sack beneath you smells faintly of cumin and wool. Not the worst pillow. The moonlight, for once, isn't hiding. It reflects in the Tigris, casting silver streaks that dance and vanish with every ripple. One last boat creaks away from the dock, its lantern swaying gently. A crewman hums a lullaby about star-watching goats and moon-drunk merchants. You smile, remembering that poor ceremonial goat again, always caught in celestial drama. Time zones, schedules, tariffs. Moonrise arguments. It's all here, humming like a reed flute just out of tune. The city lives in layered time, like a tapestry stitched from starlight, tides, and perfectly aged lentils. And you, sleepy historian, are wrapped inside it now. You wake, if you ever really slept, to the sound of rustling reeds and something plopping into the river. Maybe a fish, maybe someone's sandal. The air has shifted. Cooler now. You sit up, stretch, and take in the barely there glow of pre-dawn creeping over Babylon's rooftops like a shy cat deciding whether to ruin your nap. Upstream, a pair of old men argue in hushed tones near a sundial that's completely useless at this hour. One gestures to the sky, the other to a clay tablet. You wander over, still blinking, and catch the tail into their bickering. It's the third decan of the Lion constellation, one huffs. We're officially in the barley winnowing hour. Only if the Jupiter star isn't in retrograde. The other mutters, as if everyone should know what that means. Timekeeping in Babylon wasn't just priestly business, it was the city's hobby. Everyone had an opinion. But when it came to formalizing these opinions, the scribes at the city archives took over. These archives, hidden beneath the administrative quarter, are where the bones of Babylon's time system lie. You sneak inside because of course you do. It's oddly quiet, even for a place filled with dried mud and crumbling scrolls. The air smells like dust, dried fig leaves, and something archival. You brush your fingers along low shelves stacked with tablets, some smooth, others scarred with deep cuneiform, the writing pressed in like thumbprints from an ancient argument. Here, you find them, the zoning tablets. These are the reason you're here, and frankly, they're a bit underwhelming. No glowing runes, no dramatic declarations. Just columns of symbols outlining when certain rituals must occur in different parts of the kingdom. The temple at Borsippa, for example, had to light its evening lamps 12 degrees earlier than the palace in Sippar. Why? Because the god Marduk liked symmetry. You raise an eyebrow. That's a strange reason to invent offset worship schedules. But then again, if someone told you today that your microwave worked better under a full moon, you'd probably try it once. Historians still argue whether these zoned rituals were symbolic gestures or the earliest blueprint for geographic time calculation. Beside you, a scribe clears his throat. You didn't notice him arrive? Typical scribe behavior. He doesn't look up from his stylus as he murmurs. You're wondering about the seventh tablet, aren't you? You definitely weren't. But now you are. He leads you down a narrow hallway that smells strongly of goat glue. At the end, he produces a cracked slab, the edges blackened, as if from a small fire. Scholars say it was part of a larger document, maybe a citywide time chart, but nobody can agree on the units. They think it used shadow angles and bird migration patterns. Bird migration. Of course. He points to one symbol, resembling a fish arguing with a star, and mutters, This one supposedly indicates a zone of temporal softness. You nod sagely, as if that explains anything. More scholars have passed out trying to interpret these slabs than you care to count. Some believe the Babylonians built overlapping time belts that adjusted based on wind, harvest cycles, or even temple politics. One particularly ambitious theory suggests there was a festival override system. When a city threw a big enough party, its time zone simply took precedence. You're not sure if that's genius or chaos, but considering how modern cities still change clocks for parades and daylight savings, maybe the Babylonians weren't so different. Outside, the city is stirring. Pigeons flap from rooftops. A goat, clearly on some divine errand, trots down the street with purpose. You exit the archive just as the sun kisses the horizon, and suddenly, everything shifts. Shadows emerge. Markets open. Bells ring, but not in unison. And you finally see it, each district beginning its day on its own rhythm. The potters start with first light. The priests wait for the second rooster crow. And the brewers? They've already been up since the pre-dawn fermentation window. It's not disorganized. It's layered, like watching different sections of an orchestra slowly rise into harmony, each obeying a different conductor, yet somehow playing the same song. You climb the temple steps one last time. From up here, the city doesn't look chaotic at all. It pulses. It breathes. Every zone flows into the next, not locked to a strict hour, but tethered to light, noise, smell, and expectation. There's an inscription carved into the wall, half worn away. He who commands the time of his own gate governs the city. You smile. It's not about power. It's about alignment. Knowing your rhythm. Trusting that your neighbor's rhythm will overlap just enough. Historians still argue whether Babylon had one of the world's first time zone systems or merely a city of courteous chaos. But standing here, as the sun casts the same glow on a dozen clocks with a dozen faces, you realize it doesn't matter. They invented a way to share time without standardizing it. And somehow it worked. Below, a baker opens his shutters, revealing trays of sesame rolls. The smell is enough to make you consider abandoning this historical field trip and diving headfirst into breakfast. But not yet. You're not quite done being part of this city. You turn from a view, feet soft against the warm stone, and descend slowly, with the kind of purposeful laziness that only ancient Babylon, or a particularly long weekend, can inspire. You walk slower now. Babylon has moved into full rhythm. The city hums, not like a chorus, but like a hive, steady and deliberate. Traders haggle without urgency. Scribes lounge under overhangs, sipping watered beer. And children chase each other through alleys that curve like forgotten song lyrics. You wend your way toward the water. The Euphrates glitters like polished bronze, its surface already broken by early ferries and one very determined goose. It's here at the docks that you notice something odd. A painted post covered in strange notches. A dock worker sees your puzzled expression. He points with his chin. River clock. You raise an eyebrow. Tide comes late upstream, he explains. So we keep track. Temple opens when the third notch is dry. He says it like it's obvious. To him, it is. You nod, as if that helps. It hits you then, how layered their concept of time really is. There's temple time, marketplace time, river time, shadow time, bird time, and festival time. Not to mention moon cycles, solstice feasts, and whenever Aunt Millie gets here time, which seems to override all else in domestic scheduling. A fisherman on the pier counts under his breath. Every 10th boat is his cue to row out, because the 10th boat always leaves when the sun hits the eastern warehouse roof. Not a minute before. It's a kind of decentralization that would make modern planners weep. And yet it works. You stroll past the spice quarter, where a calendar made of dried fruit peels hangs from a stall. Each section marks a smell day, based on which imports arrive when. Cinnamon Day, for example, apparently comes before Saffron Sunday, but after Chili Regret Morning. You ask no further questions. Later, a street performer announces the hour by releasing a cage of pigeons. They scatter in every direction. Feather clock, he grins. You have no idea what that means. You tip him anyway. Nowhere is the elasticity of time more visible than in the courts. You sneak into a tiny side chamber where a judge is consulting two farmers. The issue? Someone started irrigation too early and angered the barley. The judge glances at a sand glass, then at the slant of light on the floor tiles. He mutters something about the barley spirits being not yet fully stretched, then waves the case away. Come back in an hour, he says. A real one, not a barley one. Historians still argue whether this diffuse system, part astronomy, part superstition, part habit, should be considered a formal time zone system at all. But maybe that misses the point. Babylon didn't define time to control it. They observed it to participate in it. From priest to porter, everyone in the city carries a little personal clock, usually unwritten, sometimes unspoken, but always alive. Your job as a citizen is to sync, not perfectly, but gently, with the rhythms around you. The sun begins to climb higher, pressing gold onto the ziggurat's upper tiers. From here, you can see the shadows drawing long and sharp on the palace walls. Somewhere, someone strikes a gong made of bronze and wishful thinking. You look again at the skyline. Every tower shadow tells a slightly different time, and none of them are wrong. Back by the docks, a woman is pouring water into a clay basin with notches along its inner rim. A clepsydra, the world's oldest water clock, except hers is decorated with tiny frogs, and she grins as she watches them float up to the next hour. She doesn't consult it for appointments. She watches it because it's beautiful. You sit beside her. She offers you a piece of dried fig and points to the final notch. That's when my son comes home, she says. Not because the clock says so, but because he always does. There is again, Babylonian time, not imposed, but remembered, tied to rituals, habits, and the comfort of repetition. Your body knows the rhythm long before your mind translates it. And isn't that what time really is? A story we tell our senses to keep the day from falling apart? The river shines, the city buzzes, and slowly you begin to fade again, not because it's late, but because the rhythm allows it. You close your eyes. Time bends around you like a slow, warm current. Let yourself stay here. In the softness between sun and shadow, the city quiets, not all at once, but in a cascade of subtle silences. The market voices blur into background hum. The river slips past more slowly. The breeze, once sharp with dust and spice, now feels cool against your cheek. You're still sitting by the clepsydra, the water just reaching its final notch. The frogs bob gently. The woman beside you hums a tune with no melody, and the world doesn't seem to mind. Let your breath match the rhythm of this moment. Easy, unhurried. In through your nose, out through your mouth. There's no schedule now, no exact hour to obey. You are on Babylonian time, which means you're exactly where you need to be. The stone beneath you is warm from the sun, but it's fading just a bit. A slow goodbye from the day. The light turns honey-colored, softer at the edges, like the last brushstroke of a painting. Everything holds still for just a heartbeat longer than it should, and then gently moves on. You feel in your shoulders first, release. Then in your jaw, your fingertips. Your thoughts slow down, like caravans at the city gate, waiting to enter, but in no particular rush. You are safe. You are timeless. And the city will keep turning even as you drift away. So let yourself sink. Float down, just like the Euphrates, into stillness, into rhythm, into sleep.